And for those of you who don't know, Lisa is like a raging introvert. And so we're so grateful that you came on today, that you agreed to do this.
This is the Serrano Brothers podcast.
Everybody, on today's show, we have Lisa Herlocker. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on today.
I guess I'm glad to be here.
Well, you know what's so funny, Lisa, is I get a lot of emails from you, like about all the youth ministry stuff going on. But I feel like we communicate so much just via email because you're always putting out information about youth stuff going on in the Sierra Pacific Synod. And so I'm happy that we can actually have this interface because, I get your emails all the time.
And for those of you who don't know, Lisa is like a raging introvert. And so we're so grateful that you came on today, that you agreed to do this. So we want to get to know you a little bit better. Where are you from?
I grew up in Santa Cruz, so I'm native to the Sierra Pacific Synod. And professional things, life took me to first to Fairfield and then to Rockland. So east of Sacramento. My husband and I and family raised the family there. We've lived here 32 years now. So that's kind of where I am now, and who I am, I guess. But I really miss the beach and the ocean and all that stuff. So anytime I get a chance to go to Mount Cross, I make sure there's time to also run into town and do something.
That's cool.
We are from San Diego, and so there is something about beach people needing to return to just look at the water.
The water's too cold, but just looking at it is how
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
In fact, every time I go, and it's not like the bay, it's different. Like going out to the ocean is different than like being in the bay. And so I'm glad that you still have that beach girl inside of you,
Do you have any like favorite childhood memory from growing up in Santa Cruz?
Well, because I was local, like we didn't ever went to the boardwalk unless all my relatives live out of state. So anytime we had visitors, then that was a chance to go to the boardwalk. And so we would basically do a circuit and take them, depending on their age, go to the boardwalk or something at the beach, and then go out toward where Mount Cross is, out to Henry Cowell State Park, and walk them in the redwoods. And so it was always pretty apparent to me that Santa Cruz was kind of a special place because you had access to kind of that redwood forest stuff and the beach. So I thought that was pretty cool. I never went surfing. Between the cost and the cold water, I have lots of friends that did, but I just didn't. But when I went to college, I went to Chico State, and if people asked me if I surfed, I just nodded and said yes, and just kind of rolled with it because they weren't they weren't fact checking me, right? So I just.
That's awesome.
So we kind of talked before we started recording. You're a runner.
Yes, sort of.
What got you started in running? Running is hell for me, and so I'm always fascinated by runners. And like, tell me, how did you get started running?
So, I've always wanted to be an athlete. That's just part of whatever. But I was never very good at anything. I was a C or B, as far as like level and different things. I was coordinated, but not, an athlete. And so in high school, I was on the track team because you didn't have to try out, you could just be. And so I got to do that. I was a hurdler, actually, and a sprinter in theory, but I was literally in last place in every race I ran through high school, except for one of the last races I ran as a senior. And then I got second to last. So, whatever that's worth. But I enjoyed it. I loved being on the team. And so then at various other times as an adult, I'd mess around with running, but I always thought, I hate distance running. I don't want to go for long times, right? And then my husband kind of got into it, trained for a couple marathons that he never actually did because he got hurt. And so then, a couple mile run, that seemed reasonable. I could do that. And so when my kids were gone in college and, other adult things, The older one really wanted to run the half marathon at Disneyland. And my husband was actually working out of state at the time, so he was gone like every couple of weeks. He was gone for like 2 weeks. So I thought, well, I could do this. You know, if I pay this money, and you know, I'll train for that. And so me and my daughter, and she was down in Southern California. She was at CLU at the time. So she was training on her own. I was doing my thing. And I'm a morning person, so rolling out of bed and doing that wasn't that hard. And so then I survived that, and I felt kind of good about myself because I could do it, right? And so I just kind of got into it and just kind of stuck with it, because then it was like, because I was almost 50 at that point. So it was like, well, if other old people can do this, I guess I can do it. And so then eventually I did call myself a runner, and then kind of feel like, yeah, I'm kind of athletic now. So, so, you know, and now it's kind of, yeah, you better just keep doing this as long as you can for just health reasons and stuff like that. And
that's really, do you still do, are you still doing like half marathons or 10Ks?
So I do, I did several at Disneyland, and the last 3 that I think I did there, they had something called the Double Dare. So you ran a 10K on Saturday and then the half marathon on Sunday. And of course I was at Disneyland too. So then I was like in the park, but trying to really mostly sit, but that's hard. Then they stopped doing them, but I kept, there's a local one in Sacramento that's flat, like along the river. It's really, you know, and so that's in the spring. So I was doing both of those for a couple of years. And then I've been continuing to do that one, and that organization, like during the pandemic, they had other kinds of challenges you could do. So you could get, you know, not so much that you were staying in training, but at least staying in shape. So done a lot of virtual stuff in the last few years.
That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
That's cool. Do you have any other hobbies or anything that you're involved in?
Do a lot of gardening in my, you know, yard work, kind of gardening in my yard, and then photography and reading as much as I can too, which shouldn't be surprising for an introvert. But at one point I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I need to make sure that every day I go outside and read for like half an hour. And then that way I got sunshine, and I got, you know, and kind of hit all the buttons. So I just set a timer, go out for like 30 minutes and make sure that happens almost every day. What
kind of books are you into?
I try to flip-flop between nonfiction and fiction. My college degrees are in history. I've got a master's in history, and so I read a lot of that sort of thing. I've been trying to read more. So I focused on like African-American history and women's history. So then now I'm trying to round that out with more, you know, some other ethnic groups. So I just read a couple of decent histories of like overall U.S. history, but from the perspective of well, I guess from Mexico. I mean, they're not written by Mexicans necessarily, but they're the idea being that we often look at U.S. history from East Coast to West Coast, and this was looking at it from South to North. So
interesting.
Yeah. So it was so I've read a couple kind of along those lines of like remembering, you know, Latinos have been here forever, right? So how do we, you know, incorporate that, and you know, and then Native Americans, same kind of thing, because it's hard to find general histories like that. So when I do, I try to grab them and read them. So that sort of thing, in kind of 20th century kind of stuff. So then fiction, it's kind of, I guess it's called realism, just, you know, just stories, a little bit of sci-fi, a little in fantasy stuff, but not a lot. So mostly like historical fiction and just straight up kind of fiction. You know.
I'm reading a book right now in Latin American history called "Open the Veins of Latin America," and it's basically from the perspective of that Latin America has been exploited so much, you know, first for gold and silver, and then for copper, and then for just kind of all of the natural resources, oil, and kind of from that perspective of like what that kind of exploitation has done to Latin America from colonial powers. It's a really fascinating book, and I recommend it to you if you're kind of in the Latin American history world right now.
I don't know what class it was in that I took, but at Chico I took some class for one of the books we read was they went through almost every country in Latin America and looked at the colonialism piece of it. But this was like and kind of like the 60s and 50s, 60s, and 70s, and what was going on with the revolution and some of that kind of stuff. But of course, you can't keep every book from college, so that went somewhere I lost track of somewhere. Because it'd be good to look back on. Oh, here's my chapter on Argentina. What exactly was Pinochet? You know, when it comes up in something, but that's Chile. But anyway, yeah, that's. I'm just trying to be more well-rounded in the different ethnic groups that I'm looking at or whatever, and see, and looking at it from a positive contribution, right? Immigration itself has always fascinated me because my dad's parents are immigrants, but they were white, and so then they would have obvious prejudices, and I'm like, especially like in their case, the Native American reservation that was near them, and I'm like, what are you doing? They've been here before you. Why are you talking like that? As a little kid, I was like, you people make no sense. And so that piece of immigration policy and stuff makes no sense to me. And so like the current border stuff, I'm just like, come on, sit in a room, fight this out, and come up with a plan that's not hurting people.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. That's cool that you do that. Do you have okay, I would you work for the church, obviously, right? Do you have any like spiritual disciplines that you love?
No. I am not good at like contemplative stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just can't get into that. I was raised by people who literally still to this day spend probably 2 or 3 hours doing devotional things. So we always had devotions at breakfast before school.
Wow.
Including some years, for some reason, we would sing a hymn, and these were all Lutherans. This was not some.
Really?
Yeah, and but my mom was it was part of what she thought it needed to be a good parent, and my sister and I understood that was weird, but we rolled with it, and so I have a really solid kind of Bible background, but my mother would be appalled to know that I don't pick it up and read it devotionally every day. That kind of thing. I really like church music, but not like I wouldn't listen to a Christian radio station kind of thing. It's more of the stuff you hear on a Sunday morning or whatever, not or the newer kinds of people that are doing that. But totally. I try to lean more to like Lutheran singers and Lutheran stuff, because then that way I can trust the theology a little bit better. So I don't have anything that's really consistent, like, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense.
Do you go to worship every Sunday?
Pretty much. And so, so there's that, right? Yeah, there's that piece. And when I was more actively engaged with, or when we had teenagers and I was doing youth ministries, very specifically, then I would obviously be looking at more stuff that, Bible reading and study guides and things like that. And then during the pandemic, when we didn't have a pastor, we had a couple of kids that were in 6th grade, and that's when we typically started confirmation. So I just said, hey, let's just meet in my backyard and talk about the Bible, and at least get you that basic stuff that I know I can do. And then hopefully we have a pastor that can hit the theology better than I can do. But then we lost one of those kids, and so then it was one person. So then I still had to go to confirmation because the new pastor didn't want to just be her and the one kid. So then I still had to contribute, but that was okay. I had done confirmation with our old pastor, so all that theology stuff was comfortable. I was just hoping that a pastor would be able to present it in a more interesting way, I guess, or something like that.
Those are high hopes for us.
True. But she actually asked the kid once what would make confirmation better, and he said, "We could bring more jokes." And then he's like, because like she does, because he's known me my whole life. So then he's like saying I'm a comedian.
Oh, funny.
That's awesome. What congregation are you part of right now?
So I'm at Bethel in Roseville.
Okay.
It's smallish. I when I talk to people in California, it's you could call it small. In the greater ELCA, you would call it tiny. So we worship about 40 on a Sunday. If everyone showed up, we'd have about 80, and then there's probably about 100, actually on the rolls. Um, and but it's a pretty consistent group of people. It's the demographics are kind of weird right now. I was on the call committee, so when we did that study about demographics for the parish report or whatever it's called, we were like, there was like 5 categories and we were 20% in each of them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's a fair, and we have several families that the grandparents, young adults, and children are all there.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
So what I'm hearing is young adults, if they're gonna go to church, they're gonna go to the church they grew up in. You know, at least for these people, because they live in the area, and then that's what my kids tell me. So I just came back. I was at Mount Cross this weekend with an elementary group, and the little girl that I took, her mother babysat my kids, and her grandparents were the first people to be friendly to my husband and I when we first started visiting the church. And then the little boy that we took, his mother was when I first started doing youth group, she was in the first group I took to a national gathering. So so those connections are kind of fun.
That is cool.
You have a connection to the Sierra Pacific Synod Youth Committee, right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I am one of 2 adult co-chairs of the Synod Youth Committee. And the Synod Youth Committee is a group of, well, it can be up to 30, but right now it's about 15 high school students that are elected by their peers at a retreat usually it's February. This year it's going to be the first weekend of March. And they're elected to 1-year terms, and they essentially, under some adult guidance, and there's 6 adults maybe right now, they plan and implement retreats. And so we, post-pandemic, because of kind of that drag where there's less of the retained knowledge, like cultural retention for the high school kids to understand, they don't have the peers teaching them how to do this in the same way other groups did. We've had between that and some other things, we've had to clump the last 2 years the elementary and middle school retreats together, which is actually been helpful for some families, because then they can bring their 3rd grader and their 7th grader or something, and it's easier for the kids to kind of come if they don't know anyone. So what we did this year deliberately was combine that retreat, which is the one we just had, and then, but technically normally the elementary retreat would have been in October, but we decided to use the October retreat as a training retreat for the SPSYC kids, which turned out to work out really well. So that this past retreat, with a few glitches in terms of like transitioning from one activity to another, the actual activities were thoroughly planned, and the kids just went with it and really did a good job of engaging the younger kids, and doing what we were hoping that they would do. And the parents and other chaperones that were there, they told me that how impressed they were with the kids, and so I think we're doing a really good thing. So
what I really
been on it. So
what I love about SPSYC is it's kids from all over the synod. It is a diverse group of people, of kids who are deciding to, it's almost like leadership training for them, right? Like they're taught how to be leaders in this group to lead these things. And that comes with all kinds of good, I think, helpful dynamics that they have to learn, and responsibilities that they're given. And so I just, that was one of when I was on the leadership team with SPSYC, I really loved that, because it's, the kids they're also taught how to grind a little bit, and because doing a retreat, you're on 14, 16 hours a day, One of
them, I use that phrase. Okay, on Friday night, I said, so tomorrow you're going to be on, and blah, blah, blah. And one kid says, what exactly does that mean? And I said, well, it means that, and what was interesting was at our meeting after everything was, after the campers went to bed, and we had a meeting with the SPSYC kids to make sure that we were ready for Sunday morning. And so a couple of the other adults were pointing out some stuff they'd seen, good and bad and whatever. And then one of the teenagers says, we also need to talk about this. and she called out the other kids for, it wasn't like horribly inappropriate, but it was a little bit of boundary pushing that they had done to another child, with another teenager, another member of the team. And they didn't come to us and say, hey, fix this problem. They didn't, and now the kid that stood up and said this was a senior in high school, but still that she felt that, and then the kid that felt disrespected didn't have to come and, be embarrassed or anything to say that, hey, this happened and, can you fix it? The leadership piece we've really been focusing on, especially since the pandemic. And so when we had the training retreat in October, they planned, but we also took time and, every adult did something that they're kind of, their specialty or what they felt comfortable with, and taught them through lots of different things. And so it really paid off.
That's really cool, because I think that for group that age to be able to self-regulate and to say, hey, you pushed a boundary and we need to figure this out, to actually engage that person, dude, like, what the Bible tells us to do is like approach the person directly, right. and have some self-regulation about that. Man, that's cool, because it would be so easy just to run to the leadership, to adults, and go, hey, this person did this thing, you take care of it, so they don't have to feel uncomfortable. Right. Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. Do you okay, let's talk about the National Youth Gathering. Okay. National Youth Gathering is happening July 17th through the 19th, right? 16th. It's the 16th through the 19th.
I know that because it's my anniversary. My husband's thrilled that I'll be gone. Of all places, right? Like,
how many of these youth gatherings have you gone to?
I started in 2003, so whatever count the over 3 years since then, except for the one that got canceled. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 is 6. So this will be the 7th, because there was the one that got lost.
Wow. In there. So I think your first youth gathering was my first youth gathering.
Except for I was an old lady then.
Now
I'm old, but
no, I took a group of kids in 2003. Now I was in Atlanta. Yeah.
That's funny. Small world.
Indeed.
Do you have a favorite part of the youth gathering?
Well, so I have, because all my relatives are out of state, I've been to 49 of the 50 states because of visiting, traveling when I was a kid. So part of what I like is being able to take kids who've maybe never been on an airplane and get them somewhere else and see a different part of the country. And then watch their faces when they see how many other Lutherans there are. Because in California, and especially out here, my end of the synod, there's just not as many of those churches, and they certainly don't see them at school, or they don't know about them. And in Roseville, particularly in Rockland and Placer County, we've got lots of big evangelical, giant mega church kind of things. And so that's who they see as Christian. That's who they, and I mean, I've had kids come to youth group and say things like, what do we do about the people protesting abortion right in front of my high school? I mean, that's, right. But I mean, it's that kind of thing. How do we combat that? How do we, say, well, we're Christian and that's not us, or whatever. Now it's LGBTQ stuff, and the school districts around here are all starting to pass all those the policies that the teachers are supposed to out kids and that sort of thing, tell out to their parents. And so these kids are like, but that's not us. And so the youth gathering gets them in a space where we can have conversations about this is a place where you can, a safe space to have these conversations, but also understand that you're not isolated in what you're learning at church or what you're feeling about Jesus or whatever, because all these people are more or less on the same page as you. And so it's cool to just see them kind of interact in that space and hear these different speakers. And I think the gathering does a good job of what's the word? Like learning styles, so that you can bring, say, a group of 6 kids, and each of them comes in obviously with their own stories and their own faith background and stuff, but different ways of approaching life. And the gathering has so many things happening which is why it's exhausting and overwhelming sometimes. But it's also, you can plug a kid into different things, right? And so when I went to the 2012 one in New Orleans, by the end, the two super introverted kids who happened to be senior girls, and one of whom was mine, were kind of done with the whole thing. I mean, they liked it. They weren't like pushing back against doing things. But when the main stage stuff was done that night, then they brought on some, I think it was Skillet, some Christian, but it was really loud. Like it wasn't mixed right and whatever. And they're like, we can't do this. And so I just pulled all the kids, and we went back and we did a group team building thing back in the hotel. But being able to recognize them, and not every kid you take is going to love the band that's on stage, but they might really get, like my other daughter really got something out of a couple of the speakers, which you would think might be weird for a high school kid, right? That if they're engaging enough, these kids are gonna look at that. So I really like that piece of it, and just the chance to be with the youth group in a different space too. So all those things.
So you take kids, but also you are involved somehow at the synodical level for the Sierra Pacific Synod. How are you involved at that level?
So this year they changed the name. I'm not sure I like it, but the name is Gathering Synod Champions. And every synod has a champion. In the past, it was coordinator. And so for the 2009 the first New Orleans one, the most with that set where they did it 2 years in a row, I was asked to do this job. And it's basically logistical coordination kind of stuff. And I don't know that they had it before maybe 06, but the idea is that the gathering staff, the paid staff at it's the Chicago level, is like 3 people. And that's very few people answering a lot of phone calls, right? And emails and things. And so they said, if every synod has one of these things, then so you can kind of filter the information. So the national level, they train us, the champions now, and then we are supposed to be dispensing that information to you as pastors and youth leaders and stuff at the synod level, and answering questions, pointing people in the right direction, and then maybe help. Like someone at the retreat this weekend asked me, she said, I'm in, where was she at? Somewhere, I think in, Shepherd of the Hills in Berkeley. So tiny little group. She said, just my 2 kids, but I'd like to go. And I said, well, have you checked with so-and-so at this place? Because then you could, some other Bay Area people might be able to have you tag into their group. And so some of it's happening, that kind of coordination. Some of it's just other kinds of not logistical support, like you're on your own to find your own meals and things like that, and plane tickets and stuff, but just kind of helping you think through that stuff. And so then what I've done is we've had what we call the bash in Sacramento in the spring before the event, and kind of do some final conversations with the pastors and youth leaders. And then the kids are all there too, and I find someone to like entertain them in some way. And it's just kind of a way to kick off before we all get on airplanes and go, and build that excitement at, even but to the last minute. So I'm working those details right now. So there'll be emails about that soon. So Jeremy, more emails are coming your way.
What do you got, Josh? Because I have like specific questions about the youth gathering.
No, I think you can ask some specific questions.
All right, so like, are they putting us all in as the synod in the same hotel this year or this time?
No, and that's disappointing to me because because it's helpful for synods like us that have lots of little churches. It's a good way to share chaperones and that sort of thing. And so, and like in Houston, I didn't have anyone at my church. I took my nephew from Truckee, and then we met the Reno kids there. And then I used their male chaperone and their boys for my nephew to have a room and that sort of thing. So that makes it a little bit trickier. And I know one of you or maybe both of you went in a group last time with several churches? Not last time, but in Houston.
In Houston,
yeah, that would be Josh.
Yeah, we went with
Yeah.
I think it was 2 churches that
Right.
we took, and so which made it super awesome to be able to share chaperones and stuff
Right.
like that, and there was a little more synergy with the kids rather than just a couple kids from me, a
Yeah,
couple kids
and
from
so
us,
that's still possible. It's just an extra step in the registration. But if we're all in the same hotel, it would make it a little bit nicer, especially when the room assignments come out. And you've got, oh wait, I'm one short bed because they gave me this weirdly configured room or whatever. So you can still go and hook up with other congregations. And I have one high school student now at Bethel, but could not convince him, because there was only one, to join up with anyone. There was a couple of local churches here that were willing to take him on. But if you do that, then what they ask you to do is you pick one leader to be the main person, but then when you register, there's a space to put in the synod IDs of the other kids, so that the gathering knows that someone came from Bethel or from wherever, even if that's not on the main line. But I guess they think because not Louisiana, but New Orleans is relatively compact and lots of hotels because it's a tourist-centric city, that it's from their end, probably it's less of a headache to kind of just put people where they fit rather than trying to put this size synod here and that size synod there. And everything between the Superdome and the convention center, and that's like a mile. So, which isn't fun in humidity, don't get me wrong, but it's not bad. And so I think they're just thinking that it's just from their end that maybe that's a little bit easier. And there may be other synods that don't like being all together. Maybe it's just us out here that like it.
Yeah. Is there any common questions that you're getting? What's the most common questions you're getting from folks?
Well, that's what's weird. I'm not getting questions. I know people are getting the emails because they're not bouncing, but okay. When we went to Synod Assembly, that was the opening day for registration. That Friday, Synod Assembly. Mm-hmm. I did not know if anyone was even ready to register at that point. Then Pastor Gabby from Advent in Citrus Heights, so up near me, grabbed me and said, "Hey, I just registered 5 kids and blah, 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 blah." And she wasn't even on my radar because they never sent anyone. So I'm like, so there's probably other congregations doing that. And so there was a early registration period. And so when that closed, they sent all the champions an Excel sheet of who's registered. And so that was a couple weeks ago. And at that point, 6 congregations from our synod. So right now, so it's probably about 10, 15 by now, but people aren't telling me. So if you're listening to this, please let me know. It's not that I need to hold your hand and help you through it, but it's good for me to know, because then I don't have to spam you if you're not going. I don't have to keep sending you emails. Right. And what?
So I was gonna say, so Jeremy and I are registered together.
Right, exactly. They'll eventually let me know, but I'd rather know ahead of time so I can check in with people and make sure that they know what's going on. And if we're going to do something like an event at St. John's in Sacramento in April, I want to make sure everyone knows about it and plenty of time on that. And
for sure.
So the questions I am getting are things like, we only have a couple of kids, what should we do? Or basic things like, how do you figure out budgeting and some of that? Or a couple people wanted to know some very specific things about the registration process, some of which I couldn't answer because since I'm not registering anyone, I couldn't get in to see their questions. But they gave a sample of things. So I figured, I said, just follow those directions and that should get you to, and then let me know. But some people are more nervous about, online forms and stuff. The other thing that they've done this year, which is maybe why I'm not getting as many questions, is there's a online portal to something called GLearn, and you can get into that once you, I think before you registered even, but you register for that. The links are on the website, and there are training modules that are decent, and they're not long, but they go through all the different things. So there's some stuff on there on budgeting and group dynamics kinds of things, that sort of thing. So maybe there's enough stuff out there that they're using the internet for that they don't need you need my role in the same way.
Yeah.
The other reason that it would be helpful to know who's going is that what they did this time is they added a piece to my role that wasn't there before. So in the past, for years, we've had the Synod Day, the one day we're at the gathering, everyone gets together as a Synod and worships and hangs out, right? So they've done some stuff to actually make that a much better activity. So it won't be 4 hours of sitting on your butt on a hotel room floor and being super uncomfortable. They've shortened the time to gather together and then given us time to play scavenger hunt type games and go out into the city and explore.
Oh, cool.
Because apparently part of the feedback was we drag these kids to these places and we don't have time to actually explore the city.
Yeah.
You have to be pretty deliberate about that. So they added to my role coordinating the Synod Day. And so I don't have any information on what that looks like yet. They're still finalizing some of that, but I will need people who can, maybe lead some music or lead worship in some way. And, so if you've got some youth group kids that you think this kid would be perfect to stand up there and read a prayer, or this kid would be perfect to do this, once I know what those roles are, I can, start to coordinate that with, youth leaders, and ideally find a youth leader who would just do that piece for me, right? Just do that. I will be in Louisiana as the next level up from that. They tap me to basically, I'll sit in a hotel and be the liaison between the synods and the hotel, so that if you show up for your Synod Day and the internet's not working right, then I can go find the right tech guy from the hotel to come and piece that together. So they tell me that they will make sure that whatever hotel they assign me is the Sierra Pacific one, so that I'm at least with our Synod for that. So
that's cool. That's good. That's good.
You've been to New Orleans then before.
And my daughter went to grad school there too, so I've been there a few times.
Any stuff that you recommend that we should absolutely do in New Orleans outside of the youth gathering?
I would wander down, not necessarily Bourbon Street, but wander into the French Quarter, let them see that. It's iconic, right? If you've got the time, hop on a streetcar and go toward the Garden District, and there are some of the kind of iconic cemeteries out that way. You don't necessarily need to take a tour. You can just walk through and kind of have a conversation about burial and death and rituals like that. What I usually tell people to do from California, Nevada, is to go a day early if you can, so that you've got at least a morning, midday kind of thing to do something in the city that you're in. So the last time we were in New Orleans, we did the thing with the streetcar, went out, kind of wandered around a little bit, and then went to the World War II Museum. And it's a fabulous museum. So you have to budget for that. I forget what it costs, but you have to pay a little bit to do that. But my kids really enjoyed it. I think I did it both times I was there, and both sets of kids liked it. The other thing is, once you find out your hotel, especially for our kinds of groups that tend to be smaller, you at minimum use like Google Maps and look at your kind of neighborhood and look for some like smaller restaurants, maybe opposite direction from where it looks like everyone else is going. So we were able to find like a I don't even know what you call them, but cafeteria style kind of a restaurant where you just walk in and you just walk down the row and they throw food on a plate for you, kind of thing. And it was the opposite direction from where you would think anything would be. And we just walked in that way to see what we would find, and there it was. But you could do some of that legwork, on Google or something and see that. So that's a thing which people, because the food can be the scary part. And with New Orleans, we had kids that were nervous about the food.
About like what they can eat?
Is it going to be too spicy? Is it going to be too weird? Is it going to be, it's not hamburgers and hot dogs. And my husband went with us as a chaperone or an adult leader for both of those trips, but especially the first one, because both our daughters were eligible to go, and he lives to eat. And so that was his job. He just went out and he scouted things out. And so he would just explain to them what it was, and you're going to try this, and or at least try someone else's gumbo if you don't want to risk that and you just want grilled cheese or whatever. But we found ways to make all that work. To this day, we make fun of one of these now young adults, like 30-year-olds, because she called her mother after we went to this cafeteria one, in fact, and all the kids were getting, it was po' boys. It was just sandwiches or gumbo was your only option. But she didn't know what to get. Her family eats very small, limited menu. And my daughter said, well, we can get this club sandwich one and that'll be safe. And so they split that. And then this other girl called her mom and said, I ate Louisiana food today. I had a club sandwich. And she was very excited. And my daughter's like, no. That's not what that means.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So not every kid's going to eat, shrimp and grits or something like that, but you'll get some of them. And if you can do some stuff, I mean, there's plenty of Cajun food and that kind of stuff out this way too, right? So you could do some of that ahead of time and keep some of those fears, kind of tamped down a little bit. But if you can kind of just have conversations about, especially in this case, we're going to a city that's known for its food. We're not going to McDonald's every day.
Yeah.
That's where you'll see the Minnesotans. But, I'm not kidding. Because it's easy, right? Here, take this $10, go in there, get some food. But we found it was just as easy to go to a restaurant because we were small. I mean, that does change it budget-wise. But, and it wasn't that we didn't eat something like barbecue, but at least it was, and it's also supporting the local businesses too. We tried to, go to those kind of places. So
did you do a fan boat tour there?
No, but if you could work that out, I would.
Okay, so the last time I went to New Orleans with a group of kids, I took, I think, like 20 kids on a fan boat tour, and we saw alligators out in the wild and snakes up in trees, and
that's another
fabulous.
Good one. Yeah, you could do that. And I know Hope in Fresno one time did a cooking class. They went like 2 days early, and so they did a cooking class. There is a museum across the river, I think it's across the river now, somewhere close, a Mardi Gras museum, and you can go in and see all the floats.
Oh, that's cool.
So there's some options. The New Orleans, what would you call that? The Tourism Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce, those kind of people, they have a really good website. And I think there's links to it directly from the Gathering website.
Jared, didn't you eat alligator when you were there?
Absolutely. It was delicious. It tastes like chicken with a little bit of fish on it.
Yep, it's
like somebody breathed the word fish over it. That's how it tastes.
The thing I really like, and I don't even exactly know what it is. It's called boudin. It's essentially sausage, but it's got like rice and meat and whatever in the casing. And it's really good. And it's funny because in this Champions thing or somewhere on Facebook in some group I'm in, they asked, what are you looking forward to eating in Louisiana? And everyone's saying gumbo and jambalaya. And I'm like, boudin. I'm trying to get something that sounds more authentic. And apparently the best places to get it is gas stations. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's what my husband swears by.
That's funny.
He worked, he was there for Katrina. He worked there that whole school year.
Whoa,
and he was there then, and then he's gone back for other jobs. And so he feels he's an expert on these kinds of things.
Well, thanks. Is there anything else that we should know about the gathering?
Yeah, what do you want people to know about the youth gathering? Here's your time.
Here's my time. So I would say a couple of things. One, the price has already gone up once. So you want to you have plenty of time to register. There's still plenty of spaces, but you want to move on that. It will go up again on Valentine's Day. So hopefully but by then you're really going to be behind the 8 ball because of planes, plane tickets and stuff. If you can swing it, the ELCA Youth Ministry Network has a yearly continuing ed event called the Extravaganza. And that's another hat I wear. I'm on the board. And this year, the Extravaganza is in New Orleans. So depending on when you register, if it's early enough, you'll know your hotel by the time you're there. So then you can do some more exploring that way. But they'll also offer some workshops and stuff about the gathering if you have more questions, or just an opportunity to hang out in the city, right? And explore it and look for things like airboat tours and stuff like that. So that's in January, the January 18th to the 21st. So if you can swing that's a good idea. It's a great use of continuing ed money, but they also have some limited scholarships, or maybe you can just find someone that at least for this year wants to help send you there and get you there. So I would really recommend doing that. And then the other thing not to forget about is the kind of the add-on events, the mile, which is the multicultural youth leadership event, and the table, which is the one that for the kids with disabilities. And both of those are like the 3 days before the gathering. And they're kind of inclusive, like it's $190 to register, but that covers room and board. But the first 1,000 people for the mile and the first 200 people for the table are free. Somebody gave a huge donation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So even if you think, I didn't do that, maybe I'm too late. If you've got a kid that you think could go to that, you could still tag that onto your registration. It's either individual kids and a chaperone and an adult leader, or it's half of your congregation group. So if you're especially with the table, it's almost always going to be like a guardian and a kid, because they often need that adult. With the mile, it's for kids of color or kids whose first language is in English. And so if you're looking at your group and saying, well, we're a bunch of white Lutherans, but I do have this one, Latino boy or whatever, then you could send someone early with him, and then they would just participate in the event there.
Very cool.
Yeah, and there's details on the website about that and how to kind of maneuver that, or I can help you with some of that. Everyone I know that's taken kids to that has really enjoyed it, and every year they've gotten better at it as far as the leadership. So like this time they're very deliberate that the planning team represents all the major ethnic groups that are in the ELCA. So they're making sure that those voices are heard in the planning, and talking to, like, I assume college age kind of kids, young adult age kids also. So what do you need as a, Arab American Lutheran? What do you need to help you maneuver these white spaces or whatever? So that's all being worked through. So if you've got people that qualify, I recommend that. And then this year they're doing a young adult gathering. They got a lot of pushback when they canceled the last one. And so their way to kind of compensate for that is they're going to have a parallel event. So the mile and table are before, but the young adult gathering is parallel to the youth gathering. So there'll be some overlap. Like I think they'll be in the dome, they'll be in the Superdome, but in their own section. But if you're 18 to 35 and want to go to another youth gathering, not as a volunteer, but just to go and participate, there is another way to do that. That when people register on their own, but you could send several people from a congregation. But and then when you get there, or as they're getting names, they'll put people into cohorts, so that the 18-year-olds won't be with the 35-year-olds. They'll kind of do that. And I assume they'll probably also have questions about married or not, parent or not, right? Because a 20-year-old could be a parent, and they may have more in common with a 35-year-old parent than with a 20-year-old who's just in college, right? So they'll work some of those angles, and they'll do similar things. I think they'll have some service events and things like that to do as well. But the young adult folk at the ELCA level, they're planning that, but it's parallel to the other gathering.
Very cool. It's great.
Well, we always end our interviews with 10 questions. And so here we go. Which food can you eat every day?
Burritos.
What's your favorite movie genre?
Comedy.
Salty, sweet, or savory?
Sweet.
In addition to the Bible, which book would you take with you on a deserted island?
Only one? I don't know. I have thousands of books. I don't know that I could make a decision.
Fair enough. What fills your cup?
Hanging out with friends, laughing.
And what depletes your cup?
Watching the news.
Hmm. What's your favorite holy place?
outside, but specifically when I can, the beach.
What's one piece of good advice that you've been given?
To smile and to remember that everyone else has a story that could be just as weird as mine, and so that's okay.
Yeah.
What does rest look like for you?
Reading a book somewhere.
And on that last day when you enter heaven, what do you hope God will say?
Now you're gonna make me cry. Well done, good and faithful servant. I had a pastor that talked like that all the time when I was growing up.
Everybody, this has been Lisa Herlocker. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Thanks, guys. It was more fun than I thought.
This has been the Serrano Brothers podcast. Thanks for listening.